Hello there, welcome back to another show. Today I'm going to talk about two more films from the Chris Marker collection from Soda Arts. The film I'm going to talk about today are Description of a Struggle and The Sixth Side of the Pentagon. So these are, again, I'm limiting my coverage to two ago at the moment because these are films I want to go into in some sort of detail, even if I'm sure there's plenty of dissertations about Chris Marker that will go into far more detail than I will, but this should do for giving them enough space to talk about. So, they're both controversial subjects, again, because Chris Marker liked to talk about things that were happening at the time, but it would come from a different perspective. So, he was himself all the time. He just gave his view of what was going on in the world, and it wouldn't always be the typical view you get from the news. So that's why he was not a popular director for the mainstream. He wasn't covered that well in the mainstream. A few art house places would cover him, but mostly he didn't go along with the agenda of the people who were paying for advertising in newspapers and magazines. So he's the kind of director whose films would not find it easy to get distribution. So it was just that kind of thing where he's always going to be slightly to the side of what people wanted to see. So these two films, the first one takes the description of struggle was all about Israel in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, before things were already bad, but things were going to get much worse. So this was before this occurred. And then there was the Sixth Side of the Pentagon, which is about the Vietnam War in the mid to late 60s in America, and the student demonstrations specifically about that war. So that's what we'll be covering with these two films. So, Description of Struggle is going to be controversial to talk about because Israel is a controversial subject. It's always been a controversial subject. The issues with Israel really is that you have different agendas coming into it. I mean, you have an agenda of there was a Holocaust, millions died, you need to find people, a Jewish state for Jews so they'd be safe. That was the agenda. Where they did that might have been a bit of a problem. And that's understating crazily. So, this was a UN idea, but a lot of it came from Britain and America, the idea of Israel starting up, because there was a lot of Zionists within the Jewish culture for a long time before Israel was set up. But there's a lot of Jewish people who didn't really care about that as long as they could find a place in society to survive. Some people in the Jewish community were not bothered with Israel somewhere. But it was something it didn't have any international backing until the Holocaust happened and World War II happened, and it was okay, what do we do with this group of people who have been racially genocided, basically, is the best word to do it, and millions died. What do we do with this situation? How do we help the survivors? And it was obvious a Jewish state was needed somewhere. But unfortunately, because of the war, a lot of Jewish people understandably did not want to go back to Europe. Some would go to America, but America's got its own problems, its own racial problems, which has come up in the last 80 years. But it's been there for a long time before. But before, it was about black versus white, and the whites were always destroying any chances of any black people in America. But there was a lot more racial stuff going on there below the surface, or there were in different regions. But America had its own problems, so even if you go there, a lot of people, Jewish people who went there would have their problems. But a lot of them are not going to go back to Europe. A lot of them are not, we've had enough. This is something that's going to be under the surface for centuries that finally has exploded. So we need our own state. Which I think was a good idea to have given their own state. I don't think it's a good idea to give them Israel. Because Israel is a state that has religious connotations for Jews, for Arabs, everybody has a claim in Israel, and it's something that goes beyond logic. It goes into a deepest desire for your people and a deepest desire for what you own and what you should have. And it was always going to be a problem. I remember when I was young. When you started the explanation of why Israel existed after World War II. I was thinking, what? Why couldn't I have seen the problems? I could have spotted as a kid what the problems were going to be. You know, because it was obvious what the problems were going to be. It's a problem so obvious even a child could figure out it was not a good idea. But they went ahead with it. And we've had, from the late 1940s onwards, more fighting, a lot of dubious politics, a lot of people dying for horrific reasons, lots of senseless murders. Every side has done things that have been horrendous. Is the simplest way to put it is like nobody gets a pre-pass in this situation. Everybody behaved horrendously. So Chris Marker makes a film about Israel in 1960. This is well before things get really, really bad with the Olympic terrorism event, just how the escalation, the invasions from Egypt, the Israel expanding their territories, all of that stuff. This comes before that. This is the Israel. They have the land. They're trying to make the best of it, but they are an expanding people. So Chris Marker looks upon the people as, who were they? Who are they now? What are their dreams? What do they want? And what are the potential problems they're going to have to face? And the fact that there is some wars going on. And it's a looking at the state of mind of Israel at that time. So you have to look at an historical perspective. This is a good perspective of what was it like in 1959, 1960? What was Israel like then? This is when they still had some hopes that eventually things would be sorted out. But the people were actually, importantly, these were refugees from the World War II. They had an emotional attachment to Israel as their escape to sanity. In a way, and they were having children who were seeing Israel as their home. So you're getting the first generation of people who were going to be born there, who viewed this as their home. This was not like a place they could leave. This is where they grew up. This is their birthplace. This is where their identity is. So it's all about that. It's the sense of people who have survived something horrific and they want to have a good life. And there's like 3 million people in Israel at this point, and it's burgeoning state. There's a class set up. There's different opinions. You've got your old-fashioned, deeply religious Israelis. You've got your much more cosmopolitan part of the world Israelis. You've got your own little communist group who no one gets paid, but they do everything for the community group. You've got different variations of how you survive and how you evolve Israel into a new state. So you've got Barker covers all of these people, as well as showing you like some people trying to work with the Palestinians and to help them build places for their people as well. But you also show you there has been explosions, there has been war already starting. There has been serious issues, and there's serious things bubbling under the surface that no one's quite sure where they're going to go. And of course, we see where they went. But there was so it is a film about what it meant to be Jewish to these people, but also what was there, what was around in the area, what was going on, and the variation. It was all about the variation of people in the state. Like, it wasn't just one kind of mindset. It was like this is a community of different people. The way you find in any city, you've got different people, different interests, a wide range from the religious to non-religious. You've got this whole range of people in a state that has displaced others. The film doesn't go into great detail about the displacements of the Palestinians, but it's hovering in the background. It's there. It's floating. It's like Chris Marker knew this was going to have to be addressed at some point. Like some of these people were moved out and they weren't happy, but it was one of those things. Is like it was not what the film was about. It was just like, but he was smart enough to know what the film was about, and you couldn't leave that out. But you also couldn't leave out the escape from Europe, the various different confusions of people in Europe, what to do with all these Jewish people who had been absolutely genocided. And there was a lot of guilt and a lot of feeling of unsureness, and they tried to do a quick fix solution to this problem that was probably the worst solution you could possibly have. So the film itself is about that feeling of what Israel was at this time, what its hopes were at this time, when there still was the sense of the ability to have some sort of hope, even though there's already fractures in relationships, already some military concerns. There's already a sense of things might go wrong. But it is a really interesting time capsule of what Israel was like before it became far more militarized, before it became far more, focused on its defence and to the exclusion of the Palestinians, and how it became much more, before it became much more warlike to the Palestinians and Arab worlds, where it started to feel like it was a place where they were under siege all the time and where they needed help from America all the time, and all the stuff we're seeing now, and all the kind of war crimes we've seen in from lots of different parties in this area. And this is just the building block of what it meant and why it was built. And there's lots of footage of the Jews from Europe escaping from Europe on ships and things like that, and how they were desperate. So it actually shows you the mental state of how they needed this land for themselves. But also that because Marcus is a really smart director, he shows you their point of view, but he also shows you, it lets you figure the rest out, but it lets you know it's not all easy. So even though he's sympathetic towards these people, he knows there's problems ahead. And that's what's really good with the film. It's a humanistic view of what the hopes were at this time, before everything went wrong. So that's the import of the film, was to see this society before things get really tough and a lot more indefensible. If you're taking a balanced view of it, you actually had the Palestinians do a lot of horrible stuff. The Israelis do a lot of horrible stuff over the years consistently. It's a mess. It's one of those things. It's like no one has a clue how to sort this mess out. It's a mess, and it ties all the way around the Middle East, and it's something that no one still knows what to do. It was all based on a decision that wasn't a very smart decision in the first place. So there we are. But I would definitely recommend this film just to see where this started. What was the hopeful start from this? I mean, you can be like pro-Palestinian and watch this film and get an idea what the Israelis were early on, and where some of their ideology still comes from. It would give you an idea of why they feel they're still fighting. Even though now we've moved on from the generation who survived the war, it's now people who have actually grew up there and had families grew up in Israel. So now that's our thing, was they think it's their land because they've lived there all their lives. It's a different mentality now, but that's a good way to look at how it started. So yeah, I definitely recommend seeing this. It's not easily available film, but it's definitely worth watching. And the interesting thing is, in the second film I'm about to cover, Six Sides of the Pentagon, Marker mentions Israel and those problems in comparison to the American problems in Vietnam, acknowledging that things have gone wrong there, acknowledging that what the first film was, things have moved on from it, and it's now contentious. So Six Sides of the Pentagon is looking at, it's obviously there's no six sides of a Pentagon, but it's the people try to go to the Pentagon to do the march, do the protest of the Vietnam War, and all the problems we're having. And Marker's there, and he's actually just showing the process of the march. So this is a much shorter film. I mean, the film about Israel was 60 minutes. This one's half an hour. And it's much more about the experience of going there and what the people were like and what they felt at the time, what the protesters were protesting and who they were and how they, instead of actually showing them as just this big mass of people, it gets in and sees the different people, who they are and the variations and how some people started out not being political, but because of the action of the government, it became much more politicised by government actions. How the draft was causing so many problems, and just how the situation had gotten so out of control, so that America had become a fractured state at the time. So it has a lot of things that we see nowadays when tied to race and tied to there's a general impression of America and a lot of the Western world having corrupt leaders who don't really care for the people. They just are there for themselves. I mean, that's the thing. Things always stay the same. That's what you see here. For this case, it's a war. But there's always that sense of people being frustrated with the government. But this is just the experience of it. But what the experience was of these people going to the Pentagon? What was the experience of them protesting? And what would be the reality of doing the protest versus what people would see from the outside? Because it's a protest that had a peaceful intent, but things were violent towards the end. Once the police got into it, some people were arrested. But it kind of shows you the idea of that it wasn't intended to be violent. It was literally people standing there outside the Pentagon protesting. A few of them climbed up to the Pentagon to one area of the Pentagon, and they came down the next morning. But they didn't get any further. They didn't go into anything that would have been left. Would have been like somebody mean you could legitimately shoot them for. It was like it went as far as they could, but then they stopped. And the idea was this was a protest, and the government took it too far. But it was about the ideals of the protests, and this protest that was going to keep on happening. It was something. There was a movement of people who were really angry with the war, really angry about what's going on in the war and how difficult the war had become, how messed up the situation had got, and it was about just showing people, having a film to show people to say, look, this is what actually happened here. This is what the reality was. This is what the people were about from the inside of the struggle. And that's why the film really works. It's just this sense of observation of what people actually are. Because one thing you find in media is it's always hyped up to be about some important thing they can sell. What we now call clickbait. It's always been that way. They've always said that thing. It's always been a political agenda, like, let's make these people look much worse than they were, because it makes it easier to dismiss them. That's what happened to a lot of people in the 1960s. That happens to a lot of people now. You get absolutely hammered. You know, whatever your complaint is, you're going to get hammered by the media because you're complaining about something. And no matter what political side you're on, you know, it's going to happen to you, because whatever the establishment is, they're going to find ways to get at you. It's just normal structure of government or people in power of how to defend themselves. That's just the way it happens. They can be left wing or right wing. If they're in power, they're going to defend themselves. That's just it. So, but this was just the protests, and it's something you probably you've seen about maybe experienced if you went to protest nowadays. That got a bit violent with some people. You'd be like, what the hell had happened there? I'll say it wasn't that violent until them. You know what I mean? That happens. I mean, there's protests happening. That happens all the time. And there are violent people in protest that use the protest as an excuse to be violent. There is that element. But most of the time when people go for a protest, mostly it's about protesting the thing. Protesting what they think is important to bring up. And that's, in a democracy, you need that. You do need the right to do that. And government should be more respectful for that. And not push violence. So it's about that sensation of a social march and a looking at what causes this to happen. And Marker's very careful not to go into too much detail, just gives you the information of how people see it, how people see the situation. So you get an idea what people are about, and he observes that, and observes what happens, and that's it. That's all you're going to get, but it's a very human view of this protest, this march. So again, it's a wonderful look back at what happened then, and a look at what happens in society when this need occurs, when the powerful have too much power and they're ignoring the needs of the people, and what's going to come out of that. And it should is a more complicated situation where it's not just black hat, white hats, it's actually the people doing something, and mistakes getting made, and people overusing their power. But it's actually about actual people doing things that they believe in, rather than trying to say something's heroic. No, it's people who actually have a belief in something beyond their own good. So it's of the two, this one I like more. I like this one more than the struggle one, mainly because I've probably got a much politically, I'm probably much more aligned to this one than I was to the struggle one, because I have mixed feelings, which you probably come across in the video, about Israel and the Palestinian thing. I have very mixed feelings on that. On the 6th day of the Pentagon, I don't have any mixed feelings about people's right to protest, and the state's right to give them passage to protest non-violently, and how governments can sometimes push things. There are times when some protesters push back in a way that's not right too. It just depends on the situation, depends in each individual case. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to continue doing some more of those. I've also got to finish off doing the Tarkovsky series, so I'm kind of doing both of them just now. So the Mark and Tarkovsky are going to continue. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back soon with another one. Right, bye for now.